So hi, everyone. I am Sarah Meister. I'm a curator at MoMA in the Department of Photography, and I am part of the team that's responsible for seeing through photographs. When we launched it a couple years ago, it was almost immediately one of the most rewarding aspects of my job. It was an opportunity to connect with people around the world that in a really direct way that has really changed the way I think about my job and why I'm doing it. My son is sneaking by. It's okay, go ahead, don't worry. He needs a snack, he's 14, he eats a lot. But we are now in a very different era, and one that is really challenging for many people. So to those of you who are helping in every way that you're helping, whether it's at home with your family or out on the front lines, thank you. We love the way in which the attendees and the learners for Seeing Through Photographs is just continuing to grow and grow. And we want to do all we can to engage with you, to learn with you. And today is just one expression of that, our very first Seeing Through Photographs Study Center. So will you forgive me if I read a few things? I am not very good technically, and there are a few technical notes that I want to mention. The first one is to know that we're being recorded. So when you write a message or speak, and if we can, we'll probably call on people throughout this, just know that you're being recorded. It's not too scary. Whatever, we all say things, anyway, no question is a bad question. But to ask a question, the best way to do that is through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So we'll periodically pause as we do this and ask for questions, and you can put them on the Q&A function. That's going to be the easiest way for me to see the questions you're asking. We are trying this whole thing out. So if there are things that we can do to improve it, we also welcome your feedback afterwards, and we'll try to do it better next time. The chat function, which many of you are already using, is the best way to chat amongst yourselves. So I'm not going to be monitoring that other than my joy in seeing how many people are coming from so many different parts of the world. But you can also put that in your question. So for instance, I see that Mauricio Escobar wrote, "Greetings from El Salvador." He's really glad to join the event. So I'm answering you live, Mauricio. We're really glad you're here. And Deana is saying hello from Milan, and I'll just answer to that too. I'm learning. Okay, Alex Lockett has a longer question that I'll get to. So also, you should know, it should come as no surprise that given my technical challenges, there are a whole crew of people from MoMA who are here helping me. And so if you hear somebody else's voice, or I ask a question that seems like I'm asking it to the ether, I'm asking my colleagues to help, because I definitely couldn't do this alone. So let's begin. I'm going to begin by introducing my colleague, Tasha Lutek. Tasha is a collection specialist who's worked with me at MoMA for, oh my gosh, Tasha, how long have we been working together?
A decade.
A decade! Since Tasha was essentially a baby, I was already an adult. No, just kidding. She came as a very responsible human being from the minute she walked in the door. Tasha typically runs our study center, so it seemed like a good idea to ask her if she would please co-host our first Seeing Through Photographs study center. And Tasha, take it away. Tell us a little bit about our first slide and the study center and what we hope to do today.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I should also say this is my first time doing this as well, so if I accidentally mess up in the PowerPoint, I apologize in advance. You might accidentally see my screen for a moment because I'm sharing it to share this with you. So like Sarah mentioned, I run the Study Center, which is a resource we offer at the museum. We have many different ways that we share our collection, whether through exhibitions or publications, and the Study Center is a very special resource where you can physically come into our study room, which you can see on the screen now, a picture of that, and look at photographs without glazing, without frames, and just have this intimate experience with them. It's by appointment, and we have classes that come in, curators and colleagues from other institutions, scholars, researchers, students. It's a resource we make available. And yeah, we're sorry that we can't accept appointments now that we're closed, but we were trying to think of a way to do the next best thing. So this is our attempt.
Thanks so much, Tasha. So maybe, so the way we've organized this is Tasha and I thought about week 3, documentary photography, and we picked some of our favorite photographs from the collection, and we made a PowerPoint with the help of our colleague Megan Feingold, who, just a little shout out to Megan, she makes everything we do in the sort of digital presentation mode look great. So Tasha and I developed this because we want to try to help, just like seeing through photographs, give people a sense of the materiality of these pictures and some of the issues that come up with documentary photography. And so we'll go through some. We'll actually pause for questions after each sort of little subsection. And then we'll also, we hope, have time for questions at the end. The goal is for our session to be about 45 minutes, which is a typical study center visit when we're on 53rd Street. And both Tasha and I are available the whole time, so you can ask a question to Tasha or me, and we'll interrupt each other, and we're really looking forward to this. So Tasha conceded that we could begin with Dorothea Lange because she is very near and dear to my heart these days. I organized an exhibition with my colleague River Bullock, also in the Department of Photography, that is on the walls on 53rd Street at MoMA, but those galleries are dark right now. The museum is closed to help do our part to try to prevent, flatten the curve, as they say, to keep people safe. But the exhibition I organized, Dorothea Lange, Words and Pictures, is waiting for us, we hope, when we reopen. And we don't know when that will be, sorry. So in the meantime, we're talking a little bit about Lange to begin. This is one of the photographs that is in that exhibition. And what we love about this print, so Dorothea, sorry, let's start with, who is Dorothea Lange? Why should, so Dorothea Lange was really one of the foremost photographers of the 20th century. She began as a studio photography working in San Francisco in the 1920s. And by the early 1930s, in the depths of the Great Depression, she started thinking, what would it be like, instead of photographing within her studio, to look out, to go into the world, and to capture the incredibly challenging circumstances she saw around her. She did this independently for a while, and then soon thereafter started doing it for the United States government from about 1935 until the early 40s. And the exhibition, Dorothea Lange, Words and Pictures, and just a little shout out, next Thursday, April 30th, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we're hosting a live Q&A to launch our virtual views of the Dorothea Lange exhibition. So I'll mention that again at the end because I'm so excited about it. But if you can join us next Thursday at 8 p.m. New York time, we'll have more opportunities for question and answer then. But okay, back to Lange. So Tasha and I chose this photograph, and it's one that came, you'll notice at the bottom of the caption on the left, it says, "Gift of the Farm Security Administration." What that means is that the government agency that Lange was working for actually gave this print to the museum. And this would not have been the way Lange liked to crop this image, because when she cropped it, Paul Taylor, whom you see on the left edge there, her husband, who's smoking a cigarette and taking notes, he is actually engaging with the plantation overseer so that the field hands can be looking at and engaging directly with Lange. But what's interesting is the Farm Security Administration made this print from the negatives they had on file with the government, and they just printed the whole negative and sent it along. It was cropped many different ways. And Tasha's going to show us. Oh, love it. Great. Thanks, Tasha. including in these two ways. Now, the one on the left is a book called 12 Million Black Voices, and that was usually Lange's preferred cropping, without Paul Taylor in it, but with the rest of the image intact. On the right, you see the way it was reproduced in Archibald MacLeish's poem, Land of the Free, and Lange did not like that cropping, but there you have it. So I'm just wondering, Tasha, what do you think we should do? Should we see? Someone asked me while we're on Lange, someone asked me about photographing the familiar. So maybe I'll just take a little, and I see there are some other questions about that. Oh goodness, and Simona asked a question in Italian that I am not going to be able to answer, but maybe one of our other participants could translate that for me. Sorry. Or Google, Tasha, you want to give it a Google Translate and see if you,
I can't see the questions if I'm sharing.
Oh, sorry. Okay. We're learning. So the Photographing the Familiar was an article that Dorothea Lange wrote in 1952 with her son, Daniel Dixon. And it's an article that was in the second issue of Aperture magazine when Aperture was just getting started. And in it, she really talks about the way in which you don't need to go to an exotic place. You don't need to go so far in the world in order to find interest and meaning in photographs. So unlike her government work, this kind of picture that was made when she was traveling away from her family, later in her life, she really focused on photographing in the Bay Area where she had been living since the late teens, and photographing her family more and more. So we started actually a thread in the discussion forum on week 5 in Seeing Through Photographs, and we're actually doing that online and there on Instagram. So we'll find other opportunities to talk about photographing the familiar. But it was an important subject for Lange, and I think it's an important subject today. I'm also, ready? I'm going to click on this. Tasha, you wouldn't believe how technical, Tasha knows my technical challenges, so she'll know what a miracle it is that I'm figuring this out. Alex Lockett writes, how does a photographer navigate the balance between explicitly expressing their own personal opinion on their subject matter and remaining objective? And has that balance at all shifted in the present day politically charged times? Wow, Alex, that is a really interesting question and a good one to think about with Lange, because of course, I think she felt like her personal opinion and being objective were somehow linked, that her personal opinion was that it was important to be objective, and that photography was one of the ways when in the hands of a great artist, you can make a record that is both objective and expresses something of the priorities of its maker. So maybe we'll take this image and answer thinking about that. I think this is an objective image of a plantation overseer in his field hands, but from the point of view, from the placement of the license plate, sort of, suggestively placed between this very heavy plantation overseer's legs, I get a very clear feeling both of Lange's point of view and of the circumstance she was trying to describe. So I'm not an artist, I'm just a curator. So maybe that's another question that we can also try to answer by asking some artists to join us in future study sessions or something like that, because I think it's a really important thing to be aware of, that dynamic, that tension. And certainly today it takes on ever more importance. Should we keep going? Because we have so many great slides and things we want to talk about. Is there anything else I missed with this? Sorry. Thank you, Tasha. We also just wanted to show you, this is the Dorothea Lange exhibit that I was mentioning. We wanted to share with you an installation view. You see the plantation overseer in his field hands up there on the top right in the little grid that's ahead of us. This is MoMA's print. So you see Paul Taylor is just barely visible on the left. And if you're wondering why there's so much space at the bottom of that framing, that's not normally the way we would do it, but it's like that because the print that came from the Farm Security Administration is mounted to a board. So that's invisible in the frame, but it's one of those things when we have a visitor to the study center, we can show them. So you can get a sense of sort of why a picture was made, and when it's mounted to board, that means it was meant for display. So we're displaying it. Any other?
Oh, should I go back?
Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. So our next topic is scale. And here we see a photograph by Walker Evans. Evans is a pretty important photographer to the history of the medium, but also specifically to MoMA. His photographs were the first acquired by the department, and he's also the first photographer to have a solo exhibition, first with 19th century houses and then with American Photographs. If you're familiar with the book American Photographs, you might recognize that this photograph is a plate from that publication. And what we wanted to show with this are, if you see these two installation views, the different ways that scale and size can affect how you experience a photograph. On the left is an enlargement from the 1971 retrospective of Walker Evans. And then on the right is what would be on view now, is a smaller print in the galleries. This is our museum collection print. The enlargement is not part of our collection that you see on the left. That wasn't kept by the museum. And are there questions coming in? Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm just looking. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to scroll through the questions. First of all, there are lots of people who are offering to translate, so thank you. And oh, she's sorry. Someone wrote. The question was, can we offer in translation in Italian later? I don't think so, but we will have this, and then maybe people can Google Translate. So let's. Sorry, there's still more questions about Lange. So hold on, I'm just gonna like work my way through a few more of these. Someone asked how many of these are in the public domain, and of course that's no. You can stay on Evans. We're gonna work our way through. All of the work that was made for the government is in the public domain. So that's true actually for Walker Evans or for Dorothea Lange. And someone asked about the current installations extended due to COVID. We very much hope so. All of this is being determined. And of course, the priority is the safety of our staff and the visitors. And so we're listening and working very closely with the state and local governments. We're trying, we hope so. So sorry, thanks, Nikki. Sorry, someone else, right? Is there an opportunity to watch if it's not live? Maybe I shouldn't be answering all these questions, I don't know. But yes, it is being recorded. Yeah. Okay, so I'm scrolling down to look at, there is, yeah, I would say let's keep going because let's keep going so that because some of these things are sort of more general that maybe it'll be better if we answer at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, because we have so many good slides and then we'll have some time for questions at the end.
A lot of great photographs to share. So our next one is Margaret Bourke-White at the time of the Louisville flood, 1937. And you'll see with the next slide what we want to share about this work is the variant. This photograph was reproduced in Life magazine. And on the right is an image that wasn't reproduced in Life magazine. Sorry, I should back up. Margaret Bourke-White is an American photographer and photojournalist. And she's the first female photographer hired by Life magazine, the first female war correspondent, I guess is the right term. So she's this incredible photojournalist, and there's actually a story, you can read her quotes or tale about when she went to photograph the flood. there was a sense of urgency when this event happened in 37, and she got on the last plane to Louisville and went there immediately. She hitchhiked to get there. And as she was moving through the city, she was actually on these makeshift rafts to photograph the city, which, you know, had been devastated. I think 400 people died, 1 million displaced people, you know, lost their homes. So I don't know, there's something like going back to Lange, I was thinking about how powerful Lange's photographs are now, the way they still have so much significance to us. And then looking at a photograph like this and thinking about, you know, the hardships we're going through now with such high unemployment and all these things, it's interesting to think about the power of these images and how they reflect our history. And
Tasha, there's a question that came in that maybe was asked about Lange. This is from Marta Jokum. Yeah. But I think it might be interesting to think about in terms of Bourke-White here as well. She asked, Dorothea Lange often made people pose for the picture. Does posing diminish the documentary value of a picture? And by the way, Tasha and I may have different opinions on this, which is kind of part of the fun, but I'd be interested to hear what Tasha has to say.
This might come up again in our next slide when we talk about intervention, but
yes. Oh, you're right, I should have waited. Actually, Marta, let's talk about it now, Tasha, and then we'll also talk about it later.
I mean, it depends. Like, I would say, I guess my opinion is, unlike Lange that's saying that she wants to be objective, I think you can be objective, but you have to consider that nothing can be truly neutral, that no matter what these, you know, the way you choose to frame the photograph, I mean, you can see with the Margaret Bourke-White, on the left, there's almost less information. You can't see the length of the line. There's less people looking directly at the camera than with the picture on the right. Mm-hmm. But it's just so much more powerful when you see the contrast between the billboard and the line of people waiting for food. So I guess, you know, like, these are decisions that are being made. I don't think posing necessarily makes it less truthful, if that's the question, but
so maybe that's a perfect segue to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tasha. So speaking of truth and photography, and there were some other interesting questions related to this. This is a photograph by Arthur Rothstein. And he was also working for the government when he made this image, like Dorothea Lange, like Walker Evans. And I'm going to read a quote that he said about this photograph. He wrote, "I found a sun-bleached skull and photographed it against the cracked earth in Pennington County, South Dakota. Experimenting with textures and shadows, I took many pictures and then moved the skull about 10 feet to a grassy spot near some cactus where I could get another effect." And so this is the photograph in MoMA's collection. And here is it when he moved it. And Tasha was able to dig up this newspaper article on the left from the Fargo Forum where it says it's a fake. And I think this idea of posing or arranging or intervention, it's all, I would say it is one of the, you know, the truth value of photography is this central tenet. Like, do you believe in what you're seeing? And what undermines that, whether it's true or not? If you are posing somebody, does that somehow make it less truthful? So if you think of Dorothea Lange's most famous image, Migrant Mother, or if you think of that plantation overseer and his field hands in the previous one, just because you are posing something, or in Rothstein's case here, in arranging it, I would argue that posing and arranging are things that talented photographers do in order to express their ideas with more clarity. So to go back to the Migrant Mother, Lange talks about being drawn as if by a magnet toward this woman and her children. There are 5 negatives that are in the government, that she sent to the government, what she thought of as her most successful. There are 2 others that she didn't include. But I don't think that it makes that photograph any less truthful that you can see her posing the people in it. In some ways, by the time she got to Migrant Mother, the image that we all know as the iconic image, it was like she knew she had nailed it. She knew she had made the one that most effectively conveyed her ideas. At the same time, at one point, and you can read all about this in the Migrant Mother, that we did a little oh, sorry, I don't have it with me, a little Migrant Mother one-on-one book, just about that one photo. And it's also a chapter in the Dorothea Lange Words and Pictures book. But we talk about the errant thumb. So Migrant Mother had a thumb that was sort of wrapped around a tent pole. And at one point in the late 1930s, the negative had been sent from the government back to Lange to make a print. And she had that thumb retouched. And so to make it much, much less visible. It really bothered her. And when she sent back the negative, Roy Stryker, who was her boss for the Farm Security Administration, went ballistic because, in part, scarred by the experience of what Rothstein had done and moving the skull only 10 feet, but in part because of that experience and the way it posed a challenge to the authenticity of their whole project. He was furious with her for removing the thumb. He thought it made that photograph less authentic. And so I would say that, you know, a photograph's truth value depends on all of these things. It depends on pose, it depends on placement. None of this really bothers me. I think this is like a red herring, that this is a fake, because of course, it was honestly and truly a challenging time. And Rothstein was doing his best to capture that. Lange was doing her best. But there is a question.
I would say also about the Rothstein, it's about the context of the image. And so why this is being called as a fake is because this photograph was taken 2 months before the drought was really in full force. And so someone not Rothstein had reproduced this image saying that he had photographed this symbol of the drought, whereas actually that wasn't the artist's intention. So there's other later ways that the meaning or truths can be distorted that have nothing to do with the image itself, but the context around its reproduction or its caption or the text surrounding it.
That's great, Tasha. Thank you. Okay, let's keep going. And there actually are really a lot of interesting questions coming in that I'll keep trying to get to. I'm going to let Tasha take the lead with the next one, and I'll try to look through and type some answers to some of the questions. But they all relate to what we're doing now, which great.
Yeah, well, just interrupt me if someone.
I will probably. Actually, Tasha, wait, one more thing. Maybe you could answer this. This is a question that came in. Jeff Marcus asked, how do you differentiate between documentary photography and journalistic photography? And maybe you can sort of get at that with this question of truth and intervention. And
I don't know. Do you
I mean, by the way, I'm not sure, but maybe one way of thinking about it is like, what is a photograph's function, either as a document or I think of journalistic photography or photojournalism as something that's tied to a particular event, whereas a document can function in that way, but it also can function sort of out of time and in the context of another story. But Tasha, you have thoughts?
I mean, I guess I don't really spend that much time thinking about the categorization of things. I feel like it's more useful to think about like, what is the image you're looking at? Who made it? When? Where? Like, how is it being presented to you? I don't know. I guess to me, parsing out these definitions is helpful sometimes, but that's not really what's in my mind when I'm looking at photographs.
I think that's super valid. Thank you. Okay, so Tasha, maybe you want to keep going with Winogrand?
Yeah, sure. So this is an installation view of 5 unrelated photographers, which is curated by John Sharkovsky after the former director of the department was Edward Steichen. And I just wanted to read a quote from the press release. So the point of having 5 unrelated photographers is to allow each artist's work to sort of emphasize their individual motivation and direction. And Sharkovsky says, no attempt is made to link the 5 contemporary Americans by a central theme. So
no. Sorry, can I just chime in? Because like, I think this is a young curator who's, you know, becoming the director of the Department of Photography. And his predecessor was Edward Steichen, who did this exhibition, The Family of Man, which is saying like, you know, making these connections. And John Sharkovsky is like, no attempt is being made to unite these by a theme. 5 unrelated photographers. Sorry.
You can see they're presented so differently than The Family of Man with giant, large-scale, you know, reproductions and enlargements. Here, these are smaller prints, smaller gelled and silver prints, and they're all mounted to masonite, which you can see here on the top. This is the front and back, we call it recto verso, of that image that was in the installation view. And this is kind of, you don't often get to see the backs of photographs, but for us, there's a wealth of information that tells us when this might have been printed, how it was used. We really get inscriptions. When something's mounted, we lose anything written by the photographer on the back of the print, but we're always looking at the backs to try to understand them better. And here you can see, we used to mount things to masonite, and those 2 squares on the top, left and right, there would have been wooden blocks attached to this with a wire, and it just would have hung on the wall. You know, as you could see from the installation view, there's no frame, just goes up like that. We don't do this anymore. This is not the most archival method of installation.
Well, they're in pretty good shape, actually. I mean,
they've held up, but we don't like to mount anything ourselves. We, you know, do a less invasive approach to framing and installing.
Actually, maybe there is a question that I'd like to bring forward. And this is Chiara Collini asked, speaking of scale and prints, she said she works in a small art gallery, curious to know if MoMA ever has to make choices of displaying artworks in one scale or way or another because of technical reasons. And I think what she means is, you know, are there practical or technical reasons of why something might be displayed at a certain scale? And I think having these different examples, which we wish we could show you in person, but yes, that idea of, we try to give the artists the choice. Sorry, go ahead, Tasha.
Oh, your installation for Lange, this was a decision that was made.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes we would choose, if we had more than one print, we would choose a picture at a certain scale because of what it conveyed and how we thought it would look on the wall. But in general, our job, I would say, is to, when an artist is living, to have those conversations with the living artist and to understand why they choose to make a print a particular scale. And then it's sort of our job to deal with that with our conservation staff. But I would say it is, there are sometimes practical reasons, like for the Family of Man and even for this Winogrand, for 5 unrelated photographers. It used to be, as Tasha was saying, much more common practice for the museum to decide what scale we wanted something and then to make the print accordingly.
And then below the 5 unrelated photographers image, you see 2 later prints by the image, and they're all pretty close in tonality, but I thought maybe here it would be nice to mention we don't collect negatives, with the exception of Atche's negatives, which kind of came as part of the collection. And part of it is because there's so much interpretation between the negative and the print. And these lower ones, I don't think they're printed by Winogrand, but there's something to the artist deciding how their photograph should look. And, you know, it's something that we're concerned of, and we don't want to be the ones making that interpretation, because there's just so many endless amount of decisions that can be determined about how a photograph should look. So in some cases, we have prints that were made in the 30s versus prints made in the late 60s that look completely different. I'm thinking of Bill Brandt. So sometimes there's value in having different interpretations by the same artist for how their work should look. And I'm going to keep going. Is that right?
Yeah, please do. I'll say one thing. I'm just sending a message. Louise Lohr asked, are all the photographers in this course Americans? There's one who's not. So it's a good point, and you know, that's a good suggestion, because we hope we'll do this again and we can make a less American-centric. Certainly the collection is not all American, but we were sort of playing off of one image to the next in this, but so good point.
So Sarah, do you want to talk about Gordon Parks?
Sure. So Gordon Parks was an African-American photographer who the first staff photographer for Life magazine. And in 1993, the museum acquired as a gift of Gordon Parks this picture here on the right. And it's a gelatin silver print. And I had actually, I had not looked at the issue of Life magazine that it came from. And I had always thought of it as this very moody, atmospheric kind of film noir, black and white image. And of course, as you learn anything, you learn that this was in fact an image that he had shot in color, as you can see in the image on the right. And we are working with the Gordon Parks Foundation on a new book around this photo series that was called The Atmosphere of Crime. Maybe you'll go to the next slide, Tasha. And here are two spreads from that issue in Life magazine, and another gelatin silver print on the right that we acquired more recently as the gift of the Gordon Parks Foundation. The museum just ended up purchasing modern color prints of the many pictures from this series that become the plates in the book, and that I hope when we reopen, we're going to feature in a really gorgeous collection installation, although you know, the exact timing of that is not MoMA's decision, as we said, but it's a really important series that Parks made in 1957. We're thrilled to have the modern color prints in the collection, and they really do give a very different feel. And here you can see the contrast between the gelatin silver print on the right and the color print on the left. And a lot of that has to do with to answer about the purely practical question, is how do you, how expensive is it to make a print? So in 1957, it was a very big deal that the editors of Life magazine asked Parks to photograph this story in color. They were really committing to the subject and committing to Parks and featuring the full range of what he was able to do. At the same time, when Parks was making prints for that, like the one on the right, it was prohibitively expensive to make a color print. And so he printed from that color negative as a black and white print. But we're really thrilled to have both of those prints in the collection.
I wanted to add, just because you mentioned color, sometimes conservation concerns dictate why we might show something versus another. You might know chromogenic color prints, which are, the same thing as a drugstore print you could get made of your own family photos. Those are pretty fugitive. They fade in the light, so we might not want to show that one for as long of a time. So sometimes we'll acquire an inkjet print and show that instead. So
that's a really good point, Tasha. There's some other interesting questions coming in for live about color. Sandra Lannon wrote, I thought color was forbidden in the 1950s. And I think by that, what he means is that it had sort of that serious artists worked in black and white, and that color was considered more crass or more commercial. and that, you know, and I think the answer to that is complicated. I don't think, obviously it wasn't actually forbidden, but but in part, a photographer like Gordon Parks, who was working for Life magazine, had the opportunity to express himself and his subjects in color, and that became part of his art. So, but it is an interesting reminder of sort of what the era in which someone is working means in terms of the expectation of making art. I also love Alessandro Ottombrini wrote, I think sometimes black and white can save a bad picture. Not in the case of Parks, of course. And I think that's a great question. That's a great observation, because in fact, even the opening slide of this PowerPoint that we're sharing with you was a color image. And we were looking at it and we're like, nah, it's not really working. They're like, hey, let's look at it in black and white. And it looked a lot better. So thanks, that's a good question. Okay, so yeah, sorry, one more that I'll answer and then we'll move on. Nora Hassa wrote, would you agree that back then color would also be perceived as more artsy and black and white was more serious, as you put it, and today it's exactly the other way around? I'll say, I think, as always, it's complicated. In general, more serious artists without access or opportunity to be working in color were working in black and white in the 1950s and previously. But there are certainly important exceptions, and part of the fun of what Tasha and I get to do is to think about, well, what's the rule, and then what's the exception to the rule, because there are always exceptions. And sorry, one last thing, because there's one more. Paolo Balduzzi wrote, it's too bad the color image of the prison scene got so cropped. The black and white version is captivating. It's tough to know which is more captivating. And I'll say the nice thing is that for the print that's entering the museum collection, it is not as cropped as the Life magazine reproduction. It is more, the cropping is more similar to the full negative that we see here in the black and white print. And like this one, but also even the color print of the hand coming through the prison bars is the full cropping. And I think this is one of the sort of love-hate relationship that many photographers had with Life magazine. It was this incredible platform and it had a wide, wide reach, but the editors and the layout people would do things like this, which really, well, you could understand why a photographer might be unhappy to see their image so cropped. So, okay, let's keep going.
I'll say now, if we produce anything in a MoMA publication that's cropped, we always specify detail is something that we're very aware of the sensitivities.
Tasha, I'm curious, like I find we're very, very strict about that at MoMA. Like if, you know, we would maybe occasionally on the cover of a book or for a very, you know, specific purpose, crop it and call it a detail, you know, draw attention to that. But it's interesting on Instagram, I find that I will sometimes, in order to sort of draw attention to a particular detail, I don't mind that as much. I mean, I'll usually write their detail as well, but I'm just wondering what your thinking is.
Well, I think Instagram has also changed the aspect ratio that a lot of people are shooting in general, because I think many people are shooting with the intention of sharing them that way because people are making prints less. But yeah, I think it is understood with Instagram that maybe we're not as strict as we would be with a publication, or even on like an ad or a brochure or something, we still include that detail.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, to those of us who care about what a photographer was trying to do, and Tasha and I count ourselves in that group, yeah, it matters. Okay, let's keep going so that we can also ask some questions at the end, and we're actually almost out of time. So, but let's.
Well, we'll go through our final ones quickly if we can. So here we have Susan Meiselas, another American photographer. If you're following along with the Coursera course, you've probably listened to Susan's description, her audio about this image. Sarah and I were talking the other day about how that is one of the advantages to an online course, and this format in general, is that you can include audio and videos in a way that you can if you're, if we were in the study center, we wouldn't have that. And I want to read a quote from Lena, who is the subject of this image. It's Lena on the ballet box. And I'm going to censor this slightly, just
in case our children listening.
I'm not sure who our audience is. So Lena says, and this is reproduced in the book here. I'll show you. So this is the text on the right, on the bottom. When they look at a girl, they say, is she ugly or is she okay? If she's okay, they hire her. If her face is homely and her body's all right, they hire her. If her face is pretty and her body's a mess, they hire her. I've met very few strippers that I consider even worth looking like. If you don't have talent, very little looks, all you have to do is be female and take your clothes off and do what they tell you to do. Be kind of stupid. If you're intelligent, chances are they're not going to like you because you're going to know eventually you're being effed around. So,
yeah, I think that idea of giving voice, which Meiselas did so beautifully, which Lange also and Paul Taylor did in An American Exodus. It's, yeah. Okay. Do you anything else you want to say about Meiselas?
I'll go to the next.
Okay. I will say also about Meiselas, there's that wonderful audio interview with her on Seeing Through Photographs. So if you haven't listened to that yet, I encourage you to do it.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Someone asked, what is a ballet box? Tosh, you want to say what a ballet box is?
I think it's just this box that she stands on.
I think so too.
It's like, it's her stage in this sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so two more artists to go through. Here we have Fax. We have this beautiful cyanotype by Anna Atkins. Here's our British photographer. And this is a photogram, actually, which means that she put these pieces in direct contact and then exposed them. And these are illustrations for a reference book about algae. And here you can see this photograph installed.
Wistful little moment of the galleries. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, and you can slightly tell there's another larger cyanotype, medical cyanotype, and some other more medical, or I don't know, falsely medical images here. And then to counter that, we have fictions. And Sarah, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. We just wanted to end, several people have noticed that this is a pretty historical and American-centric story that we've been telling. We had more pictures in it. This took us a long time to get through, so we're going to be very, very disciplined going forward. And Deana Lawson is an extraordinary artist working today who operates within what I would call photography's broad documentary traditions, but she certainly understands the way in which you can construct fictions and tell truths through those fictions. So do you have that quote? Oh yeah. Tasha gave me this great quote that says, and this is a quote from Deana Lawson, where she says, the body's ability to channel personal and social histories, drawing on the various formal and informal languages of the medium and its archival capabilities. And so that idea of how you can tell something that's true that isn't necessarily, you can tell something that's true through a photograph that isn't necessarily that's what an artist does, is to reach at that truth through the fiction. And we're including, Deana was in New Photography, and so we'll conclude with this because, again, in the study center, when we bring people to the museum to look at photographs, one of the things we always like to do is to, when you look at the original print, you can understand something of its scale, of its materiality, of the ambition of the artist who's making it. And that's partly what we were trying to do today. I'm gonna, Tasha, maybe I'm gonna just scroll through for a few more questions. I'll just put a little plug one more, before Tasha winds up for us. I'm gonna put a little plug one more time for our Dorothea Lange Virtual Views launch, which is gonna be next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, New York time, and we're going to have a live Q&A, and it's going to be a really exciting moment. Hope that many of you can join us for that. We also welcome your suggestions for other topics. If we didn't get to your questions today, don't worry, we're paying attention. We are going to I think this was fun. Won't we do this again, Tasha? Yeah. We'll do it again, and we'll thank you to all of the team that you can't see behind us, but maybe Tasha, you'll just wrap it up and sort of, I don't know, you want to wrap it up?
Sure. If there's no other questions.
Well, there are a lot of I should say.
There's no other questions that we're going to answer.
There are only 57 open questions, so yeah, thank you really for joining us, for asking such good questions.
So again, we're sorry that our study center is currently closed, but in a way, this is kind of it's not really a replacement because it's so different. This Lawson photograph, I would never show this to you in the study center because it's too large. So, this is a way we can talk about this work. And then also, we're not usually showing the installation views and things, but even though right now we only have access to digital images, we hope that this helps you think about looking at these images and thinking about the context that they're in and how they're presented. I encourage you to always read the caption of an image to see the date, the print date, the dimensions. All of these details will tell you so much and can really change. I hope we've shown some ways it can change or affect how you look at an image. And I think next we'll do week 4, pictures of people, right? Fun. So if you have any suggestions or things.
And we heard you. More not American and more contemporary. Yes, noted.
Absolutely.
But yes, other suggestions too are welcome.
We have such an amazing collection to pull from that, it'll be no problem to supply whatever photographs you're interested in if there's a strong interest in something. We will use the Seen Through photographs as our sort of framework for this, but we can show many more images than are represented there. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate all your participation and all your interest. And we now know this was popular, so we'll definitely do it again. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Ciao.